What's up, guys? Welcome back to another Light and Lines video. I'm Ben Greaves, and if we haven't met before, I'm a content creator for the building industry, and I'm here to help you build a long-lasting and successful building company, land those dream projects with dream clients, and ultimately make more money. So with that being said, let's get into it. A couple of weeks ago, I was sent a really great podcast episode from an architect that I know, and it followed on from a discussion that he and I were having about how he could connect with his ideal clients and get people to know more about him as a person and as a business, rather than just people knowing what he provides, which is architectural services. A lot of what this podcast spoke about was different marketing methods and types of content that architects can use to connect with people in ways that really aren't the usual ways that they're used to, which is generally still photos and some blog posts, but instead using something called narrative-driven content or storytelling content. Now, given this is the exact type of content that I recommend to almost everybody that I work with, I decided to create this video for you to discuss exactly what is narrative-driven content and how it can be beneficial for you if you're a builder, or beneficial for you if you're an architect and you're looking at doing more to connect with people in your business and your marketing efforts. Now, stick around to the end of this video because I'm also going to share with you a brilliant example from a mate of mine who had one of his architecture films recently blow up, and in 2 weeks has amassed over 100,000 views on YouTube. Proof of exactly how powerful this kind of content is. As a content creator and a marketer myself, I've decided to specialize in what I call people-led or narrative-driven content, essentially storytelling content. And what this is a specific type of content that uses people to drive a narrative and help them achieve an outcome through their video. Now, I've been working with buildings and architecture for the better part of 13 years now, and over time, I've seen just about every type of marketing trend come and go. And the one type of content that's proven itself against the test of time is this narrative or storytelling type of content, which, when you think about it, it kind of makes perfect sense because people have been telling stories since we were Neanderthals drawing on rock walls in our caves. The thing that really draws people to this kind of content is the characters in this content. And in these types of films, you've obviously got the character of the builder or the architect who's sitting down and being interviewed, but the building itself becomes a character, and a character with its own story to tell. Now, look, I get it. You're probably thinking, yeah, so what? People have been shooting video of buildings for years, and yeah, you're right. But what this is and what I'm dedicated to doing is really elevating these videos to the level that the architecture itself deserves and the level that's actually going to get people results. Otherwise, there's no point. There's a lot of different ways that a building can be captured, but a high quality narrative-driven architecture film, you're basically getting the energy of the film from the architecture and the subject matter itself. When you're shooting good architecture, in a way, you're giving it respect back and you're giving it the respect it deserves. I see a lot of gimbal videos, flying through the house, and they never stop moving. They never let you rest and they never let you take in the space. And there's a scene change every 3 seconds with these things. And hey, if that's what you like to do and if that's what you like to watch, then that's cool. I'm not knocking it. But to me, those types of videos, while they're okay for real estate, they don't give the architecture the respect it deserves, and they do nothing to tell a story and immerse the viewer to give them a taste of what actually being in that space feels like. And they do nothing to push someone through and help them through that sales process to ideally become a client of yours. The architecture and the building itself definitely dictate the direction that a film like this is going to go. It's about responding to the context of where the project is and what the light's doing. So when I shoot a project like this, I'm playing with different lighting and materials and textures. And the single biggest difference between these types of films is the time that it takes and the time spent to create the shots that you're seeing in the finished product. When you're not under a time crunch of like, hey, we need to be in and be out and bounce and get out of here, you can really create something special, something beautiful, and something powerful. When you've got the time, when you've got the opportunity to shoot it in a variety of different types of light, so from early morning right through to dusk, when there's time to not have to rush through a project, that can really help elevate the overall production value of what the client's spending their money on. With a lot of these projects, you've only got a day to shoot it. So you're there as early as possible to get that nice morning light, and then you're staying as late as possible to get the last of that light before the sun drops. And within that time frame, within that 8 to 10 hours, it's literally about making the most of every second that you've got, and you've got to be opportunistic with how the light changes throughout the day. For example, sometimes, especially lately, it's going to be raining and it's going to be pretty miserable outside, and you just have to lean into it. So you'll be capturing rain and water drops and close-ups of raindrops and things like that, and you'll be getting more textural details. But if it's a bright sunny day, I mean, personally, that's awesome, because then you've got contrast in what you're creating. There's light and shadow, and there's highlights that play off each other. And these are things that the architect has literally had to consider when designing the home. How does the light change throughout the days and the seasons? And how does that impact your experience within the home if you're the client that's living there? Well, I know that there's a lot of photographers out there who prefer cloudy days, and that's kind of a photo versus video thing, because cloudy days are very flat and the lighting's very even. But when you're creating video content and telling stories through these films, you're really at the mercy of whatever the weather's going to do outside. And you just got to be flexible with it. I mean, me personally, I wish that every day was bright and sunny and had golden sun, because that does create nice shadows. But unfortunately, it's not like that all the time. And it just means that when I'm on a shoot day, that things are going to be constantly changing and lights constantly changing. So I'm always on the lookout for a spot where I can stop and be like, oh my God, this is going to be a great time lapse spot, for example. And I'll set something up for that throughout the day to really be able to capture that. So you really do have to be opportunistic and flexible, because ultimately we don't have any control over weather conditions. So that's why you've got to be committed to being there at dawn and going home at dusk. So you've got this huge expanse of time in the middle of the day where you're basically kind of just sitting there with a lot of time to think and absorb and take in the building and take in the architecture, and try to look for those things that maybe you don't notice in the first half hour that you're there. But by hour 4 or 5 or 6 or 7, you're really starting to pick up on some of these extra things that are going to be happening in the project over time. The reality of a film shoot like this is that I'll often run around and spend the first half of the day shooting a project, and then the light will change in the afternoon, or the sun will break through the clouds if it's an overcast day. And then you essentially kind of have to rush through again like a little bit of a madman, trying to reshoot everything again, because it looks completely different and it might look so much better now that the light's changed. But realistically and ultimately, that just gives you so many more options in the edit to work with. So essentially, no matter what the weather's doing, you have to lean into it. And it's just the commercial reality of filming these kinds of films and these types of projects. You simply can't let the weather ruin a good shoot day. And the weather literally is what can make these things fun. Some of my favorite videos that I've seen perform really, really well have been like when it's been pissing down rain all day, and it gives the building potentially a sense of mood that, that's not necessarily always a bad thing. So you've really just got to roll with the punches. In the chunk of time that you're there, you're trying to shoot the building, you're trying to do interviews, you're trying to deal, potentially with homeowners and their schedules, and the kids are coming home from school at 3 o'clock, and all of these different kinds of things and these different moving pieces. And that's really what makes a great filmmaker good at what they do. And what I hope people appreciate is that you got to be pretty flexible in that, you need to, in that sense, like I said, you've got to roll with the punches on these kinds of things as well. When I do one of these films, I'm always going to do what I need to do to accommodate people. But anyone who works with me on a film like this should know that I'm also very committed to delivering the best finished product that I can. And I'm pretty uncompromising in pursuit of that sort of excellence. And, I work my guts out to try and capture a project in every angle and every lighting condition. So I've got extra things to use there for the edit. And I speak to a lot of architects and I speak to a lot of builders, and I talk to them and ask them about, what's really attracting them to the idea of actually getting a video made about one of their projects. And I think what they love about it is that it really does give you that sense that you do get the feeling of that changing light and the changing conditions and the rain and the sun and that variety of different ways that you can experience a home or an architecturally designed home, and how it can change throughout the days and the seasons or the week. And it's not something that you're ever really going to see unless you're the client living there, and you don't really get to feel that through traditional stills photos. Traditionally, on an architectural photo shoot, everything's hyper perfect, hyper curated to get that perfect moment in time. But what a lot of architects that I'm speaking to, I'm finding that the thing that's really missing is that actual feeling and the experience of being in the space. So it's just interesting hearing about those types of things and picking up on that, because I think it's that sort of more emotional feeling that you get when you're watching these films, and those, great feelings about architecture is that sense that things change, and it's almost a bit of a byproduct of the way that you shoot and the way that you are flexible during a shoot day. And that's just kind of what happens. Often with architectural photography, they're very considered frames, right? And it's processed to within an inch of its life, and it's not necessarily reflective of what the space actually feels like, where a video's a little bit more honest, it's a little bit more raw, and it's harder to kind of hide things like you can sometimes do with photography. I'll often find myself saying, there's no Photoshop with video. There's been some shoots that I've done where I go there and everything's ready to go and it's styled and it's absolutely perfect. Or there's other shoots where there's things that haven't quite been finished properly, or there's a stylist there and they've just taken out all the homeowners' furniture and they've put in photo shoot furniture and photo shoot styling. And, sometimes the stylist will turn to me and they'll be like, oh, so you're going to shoot in this direction, or the photographer shot from over there and, looking this way. So we've put all the mess over here out of shot. And, in response, I'm kind of like, no, no, no. Like, we need to shoot 360, as in every room, every space, every angle, multiple times. And I mean, obviously this is within reason, so I'll often find a trash room to, hide all the unwanted furniture and the loose things. But in video content like this, it's a lot more realistic. And photographers, they'll often jump from room to room to room, and that's it. Whereas I'll go back and forth throughout the day as the light changes, and I might end up visiting a space 2 or 3 or 4 times throughout the day, where photography doesn't quite work like that. You capture a space and you move on. And realistically, one of the biggest challenges on the day of the shoot is either clients who live in the house or the actual person being interviewed or the architect. And it's giving them the idea that I need to be able to jump at any moment and go into any room and shoot that space again, or shoot it through a particular reflection or through a doorway or through a window or something like that. So, one of the biggest things that I find myself saying on a shoot is getting people to stop moving because of their reflection, when they could actually be behind me and around the corner thinking that they're out of shot, when in reality, they're actually not. So one of the first things that I'll do on any given shoot days, we come in, we go through and clean up whatever we need to, and get rid of all the mess, and hide the doormat, and essentially just let everyone know where I'm going to be shooting. Because, let's be real, people basically want their home back as soon as possible. And usually there's someone at home working, or there's someone wanting to chill and hang out, and I'll get them to go into the most convenient spot for me, which is usually, a wine cellar or a garage or a spare bedroom that I know I'm not going to shoot, just so I've got that flexibility again to be able to bounce around the home at any given time. And as I say fit, as I see the light move, the whole point of what I'm doing is trying to make the space for the home feel more honest, and try and show what it's like to actually be in that space a little bit more. And that's not to say that photography can't do that. Photography is still super important. And I mean, I still do architectural photography, and it's still definitely important for architects. But if we're talking specifically about marketing for architects and builders, I can't express strongly enough about architectural films and narrative driven films. So obviously, I'm a little bit biased there because it tells a bit more of the story about the space, and it's a bit more engaging. When you watch a film or a narrative driven film, you want to be able to feel what it's kind of like to move through that space, as well as telling that story for the architect of how they've kind of designed and built this, and why they've chosen this and made certain choices, and be able to show that through this film is really powerful. And That's why so many people like watching architecture films, and why the audience for this is so big. For whatever reason, it's really compelling content. The other really important thing to consider with these types of films is, other than being able to adapt to changing weather conditions, is it's that working relationship with the architect, and the dynamic between the architect and the filmmaker, or the builder and the filmmaker, if I'm doing one of these films for a builder. What often happens is the architect or the builder, they'll often come in and they'll have these expectations about, what shots they think might look good. And maybe they're trying to exert some control over shot choices and things like that. And sometimes when an architect's working with a photographer, depending on who the photographer is, that dynamic and that power, it might shift one way or the other, depending on who they're working with. However, when it comes to working with video, it's sort of a different beast entirely, where you're kind of saying, look, you might have these 5 or 6 perfect shots, but in reality, it's not about that. I'm doing something completely different here. So it's kind of a bit of a balance. And obviously, I'll take guidance from the architect or the builder, and I'll take, what they're talking about into account with decision making, but it's definitely got to be a bit of both. And I mean, I totally get it, because this project, it's like their baby. They've spent years on this sometimes. So they're obviously a bit more nervous and a bit more cautious, and they might not have done a video like this before, or they might not have worked with me before. So all of that has to get taken into account. Sometimes the client will come in on the day and they're like, oh, you're going to shoot this and shoot that, right? And I just, I'll be pretty chill in the approach, and obviously let them know that, yeah, of course, we're going to get this, we're going to get that, we're going to get everything that they want and more. But there's also a process that I have, and a process that I stick to, because obviously some of these ideas aren't going to be so great. And at the end of the day, it's video that we're shooting, and we shoot so many shots that it doesn't really matter if we get extra stuff, and it's not going to hurt me to get whatever they want. And then when I sit down during the edit process, if those particular shots suit the narrative and shoot the storyline and it's there, well, it's going to get used. And if it's not there, it's going to be fine, because there's going to be plenty of other shots that we can work with. So it's all going to be okay at the end of the day. My kind of ideal scenario is, when I get to a project, I get there in the morning and the architect's there or the builders are all there, and they'll give me a walkthrough of the space. So I actually get to experience the project through their eyes first. And they're going to point out things to me that, I'm not going to see in a million years. So, they're going to point out processes, or tell me a story about certain processes, or something like that, behind a section of the house that's not super obvious at first. And it's amazing when they can do that, because it's like getting an insight into what they've done before I even start shooting. So that means that I'm going to be able to deliver that and shoot it even better, because I'm actually honing in on these areas that are important to them. When that doesn't happen, and they're just like, they're a bit busy, and sometimes we do have to roll into the interview pretty quickly and roll out, I've still got the rest of the day to focus on those key points that they've mentioned and that they've highlighted. But yeah, it can kind of be funny sometimes, because they'll be super practical with what they're talking about, or sometimes it's a way more top level explanation, and they get very arty in their explanations. And I love that. I love getting into their heads and understanding those types of processes from their perspective. But that totally depends on what they're talking about. And, that's always going to change. But once we know what the actual story is, it's easier to then go in and create that, and put these things together and back that up with visuals, because, that's obviously the other piece of the puzzle here. To be able to back up visually whatever they're saying in the interview is super important, and it requires a pretty high degree of trust. At the end of the day, I know what I'm trying to achieve because of my process leading into these kinds of videos. So it's really important for the client to understand that, you kind of need to be left alone without being micromanaged, because it can really hinder the process, even just in terms of time left to create what we need to create. Now, obviously, it's crucial to have a brief so you know what you're trying to do and what the outcome is that you're trying to achieve with the video, but there's got to be a certain level of trust there to execute. I'm never going to make a project look bad, And that not only extends to how I shoot it, but in the edit process as well. When it comes down to things like music selection, shot selection, and all of these different elements that have to come together to ultimately create that film. The way to get the best result with these kinds of things is to engage a good supplier that you actually trust and that you can trust and specializes in these kinds of things, and then trust them to go out and do their thing. And not everybody out there with a camera can create this kind of content or create it well and in a way that's actually going to deliver the desired outcome that the client's looking for. So by all means, give the supplier a brief and have an idea about, what you like and what you don't like. But the best way to get the best finished product, I really do think, is to trust me and trust your supplier. If it's not me that you're working with, to go out and do what they do well and then get out of the way. An example of this, and something that it comes up pretty regularly, is people usually getting really nitpicky about what interview frame they have and where they're sitting and what's in the background. And sometimes they're really like, I know what I like and how I want to shoot it. And sometimes I'll definitely entertain their ideas within reason. But there's been, quite a few times where I've had to say, no, it's actually a pretty terrible idea. And I don't want to shoot into a backlit window because it's just going to be blown out and terrible to everyone that's watching. And to everyone's credit who I've had that conversation with, thankfully they've listened and they've loved the end result. What I'll quite often do in that process is I'll give them a choice, and I'll show you a few options and say, look, it's going to be like this or it's like that. And ultimately people wind up being pretty happy with that. So of course I'm always flexible, and you have to be, but I'm also pretty biased. And if you trust me and let me do my thing, you're going to get a good result. That's what I'm there for. Another thing is, video content starting to get a lot more popular now. And because of that, I'm starting to notice a trend of a lot of architectural still photographers who are coming in and trying their hand at video. And it's really interesting to see them go through this kind of evolution where they're setting the camera and the tripod up basically exactly the same as you would for a normal stills photo, and simply just hitting record and waiting for a curtain to blow, or a tree to blow in the wind or something like that. And I find there's this gradual evolution over time where you've really got to kind of let go and not be afraid of being a little bit more free and a bit more creative. And I don't see too many people who've come from a stills background actually completely making that plunge into the deep end and not setting up those kind of perfect, immaculate shots like you'd traditionally see for a stills photo. So I guess the kind of natural thought process or reaction is to do the exact same thing for a photo, which is, chuck a camera on a tripod and wait for the action to happen. And I don't know if that's from a lack of experience of working with video, because, obviously with video, we have sliders and drones and gimbals and all different kinds of things that you can use to move the camera through the space. And it's just really something that comes with time, because then you see these guys, they go to the complete extreme on the other end of the spectrum and the camera never stops moving. And, there's a new shot every 3 or 4 seconds and the music's really upbeat and fast paced. But ultimately, it makes for a really unsettling video where your eye never really gets a chance to rest and really take in and absorb what it's seeing. One thing as a filmmaker that you really need to be conscious of is, the project itself can determine how much or how little camera movement there'll be throughout the space. For example, if I'm shooting a project that's got heaps of different textures and stuff like that, I'm going to want to focus more on a macro level. So I'm getting close-ups of concrete and wood grain and all of these beautiful textures, and it doesn't really need to be moving all that much. So it is a little bit more like a photo. And then there's other spaces that are so grand and so vast and almost lacking detail, because the detail is the space itself, that you do have to move the camera a lot more to make the shot a lot more visually interesting, because there's not really as much else there other than space. So if you're a client, if you're an architect or a builder and you're looking at, suppliers and trying to figure out who you want to work with to make a film and who would you trust and feel comfortable getting to do that kind of thing, there's going to be those regular household names that, people in the industry know of, like your Tom Fergusons and your Martin Seigner and Rory Gardner and other big names like that. And some of those guys are starting to venture into video a little bit more. So, there's that question of, do you work with someone with a very long track record in architecture, which is sometimes seen as a bit of a must have thing and a bit of a status symbol? And then you've got some other guys like myself who, we're not your go to household big names for photography that you see in all the magazines, but who've really dedicated ourselves to learning architectural filmmaking. So guys like Viral Patel in Melbourne or Nick from Ravens at Odds in Queensland, while yes, these guys can take nice images, their filmmaking really is next level, but they might not be the first name that springs to mind for an architect wanting to venture into getting their first architectural film made. And I think that's where the industry as a whole has really kind of let itself down. A lot of people tend to think that, these guys here are the must have names on your project if you want to be taken seriously. And yeah, for photos, a lot of the time it does work out like that. And the end result, yeah, it's great. But there's a lot of newer guys whose names aren't as well known who could probably outfilm these guys because it's what we're dedicated to. Now, as a photographer myself, I can definitely see it from that perspective. And I think a lot of photographers fall down in some of the elements of delivering a compelling video in terms of storytelling. Where I personally consider myself lucky is I've been lucky enough to spend probably the better part of 10 years also working in the film and TV industry, which is driven by storytelling. Just as a very short CV, I guess, I started in the industry working on the crew of Home and Away. I worked on Packed to the Rafters for a little while and quite a few short films. I worked on The Block for a bit and even worked on Wolverine, one of the Marvel movies that everybody knows. So I've been really blessed to have worked with some amazing storytellers and I've gotten to see their work from the inside. So there's definitely things that I can take from that and that I put into my own storytelling films. Shooting the content and having a great selection of shots to work with it's really only half the battle. You might have a great interview and great lighting and great shots and everything's planned, and then you've still got to go back and sit down and do the edit. And if you don't understand how to put a story together with that arc and that beginning, middle, and end, it doesn't matter how good your shots are, it's going to fall flat and it's going to fall apart. And that's where I consider myself really blessed to have come from the background that I have outside of my architecture work. Because it's not always easy. Filmmakers often joke that editing's made up of 10% shooting, 10% editing, and the other 80% is just finding the right song to use. I'll often spend hours searching for music to the point of nearly going insane. So there's a lot of behind the scenes things here that the client doesn't really know about or ever really get to see, but it all has to come together perfectly to get them the result they want. So it's super important that you make sure that you're working with the right people when it comes to this type of content. The other part that you have to know how to handle is the interview. Most of the time with these films, you're sitting down with someone who's never been on camera before. They're nervous, they're anxious, they want to make sure that they deliver because they know that, they're spending a lot of money or their boss is spending a lot of money and, they don't want to stuff it up and they've got this enormous pressure on them to deliver and to get it right. And it's a big task and it's a scary thing. So it's super important to know how to handle that and know how to kind of bring them out of that and into a space where they're relaxed and they're themselves and they're authentic and they're not in their own head. They're not worrying about what to say and what to do. So that's where the person conducting the interview really does have to know what they're doing. It's all about getting that person being interviewed out of their own head, getting them comfortable on camera, and you really need a certain level of emotional intelligence to be able to do that. You want them to go from a place of really being nervous to being able to walk away from that interview going like, wow, like that was fun and I can't wait to see the end result. And that interview itself, it might go for 45 minutes to an hour. And within that time frame, within that hour, you've got to find that 5 or 6 minutes of story that's going to present the project in the right way. And it can be really easy to go down the wrong path and fall flat. So, as me, as the interviewer, you want it to be interesting, you want it to be informative and engaging, but you also have to be able to carry a story out of it. And you might have two or three of these on the day, depending on the size of the project or the number of stakeholders involved. So, when you're doing these interviews, you basically don't even want them knowing that the camera's there. And you basically you want them having a conversation, and you want to have a conversation with them about the project. So I want to be talking, about things that I haven't heard before and what's unique about this, and, what's unique about the architect or this builder's approach, and what's actually going to be interesting to the people at the end of the day who are going to be the ones watching this film. So you've obviously got, a few standard things that you want to cross off your list in your conversation, but there's been plenty of occasions where I've thought I've got it and I thought I know how an edit might go. But when I get back and I put it in the edit suite and I listen back to that interview again and start cutting, I'm like, where did this gem or this line of thinking come from? And then the storyline that comes from that has really driven the rest of the film. So yeah, like sometimes it really can kind of sneak up on you. But ultimately, the main thing here is, we want it to be authentic. Authenticity here is everything, because you might have a developer involved and then there's the architect or there's a homeowner, and you're trying to find things that the other person can reinforce, because that adds authenticity to the film and it adds honesty, because everyone's kind of talking about the same thing from their own perspective. It can work the opposite way too. There's been plenty of times where I've really liked the particular part of a project and I've thought it was really cool. And then the person who I've been talking to has just kind of brushed it off and not wanted to talk about it because it didn't come together exactly how they wanted. And, they thought it was terrible and they thought it was embarrassing and don't even really want to show it and mention it. So you definitely have to be flexible with how you conduct the interview if you want to get the most out of it. There's been times where, I might have spent a solid 45 minutes filming something that I thought was absolutely amazing. And then the architect's been like, nah, I don't want to talk about that. So that footage, it's never going to see the light of day. It's funny. Sometimes the things that an architect or a builder doesn't like are hilarious because they're things that the average person would think are really neat and interesting as well. So it can definitely be an interesting balance and dynamic, but that's part of what I love about it. And that's part of the fun of these films. So I guess it really just comes back to the fact that, things are subjective and we've all got our own personal tastes. I think I'm pretty lucky that I've been exposed to such a huge variety of projects over the years. I've shot mansions in the Hills District that are well into the tens of millions of dollars that you might think have a lot to offer that personally I didn't find too interesting and I thought were a bit boring. And I've also shot super small converted garages on parts of the South Coast that I've absolutely fallen in love with. And I could spend days in without ever getting bored and running out of things to film. So it really just goes to show that everyone's taste is different. So it's important when going into one of these things that you've got to understand that you can't be all things to all people. And for anyone who's looking at dipping their toe into this style of filmmaking for their next project, my biggest piece of advice would be really sit down and have a think about what you want your outcome or your desired result to be. And then we can try and back everything else into that. And what I mean by that is, do you want something that's really kind of going to show the level of intricacy and your expertise in delivering a really, detailed project? Or do you want something a bit more brand recognition and to share on socials? Or do you want a specific case study to sit on your website for years to come and use it as a sales tool? Just touching on that briefly, video is such a great sales tool, and especially this type of video, because building a home or engaging an architect is such a personal process, and working with the right person is just as important to the client as it is for the builder. And people do business with people, not businesses. So, they're in this process for a long time. So they want to feel comfortable with, who they're working with, and they want to know that who they're working with is trustworthy. And this type of video plays such a huge role in that. And video should definitely be used as a sales tool to help with that. I think it asked the question if we can do a video like this without the narrative and without the interview. And to be honest, it just doesn't convey the same type of message if you're only doing visuals and music only. It's like there's a missing piece of the puzzle. They lack connection, they lack emotion, and they really kind of lack the ability to grab someone's attention and get them engaged. So, look, that's why I feel so strongly about having that interview and that narrative led storyline, because it really is what works best for you as the client. So, yeah, when we know that and when we know what the desired outcome is that you're looking for, we basically work backwards from there. Now, if you were to jump into the YouTube comments and listen to every armchair critic on the internet, and you're putting out, content that's suited for them, you're putting out content that's completely garbage, and it'd just be a total waste of time and money, which defeats the entire point in what we're doing. So that's why I always start this process by asking, what's the outcome you want to achieve? What does success look like for you? Once you can identify the key messages that you're trying to get across and what was special about the project, or what did you have to do, or what did you have to know about the project in order to be able to deliver it for your client, or even what makes it special, if we can kind of have a list of, say, 5 key messages, then you can start to think about questions for the interview and ask specific questions that will at least get those answers and speak to those kinds of key messages that you're really trying to get across. And there's definitely been times where someone will come in and they've written out a script and where they talk eloquently about what they've done and why they've done it. And quite a lot of the time, none of that's even going to get used, because the delivery of a script, it doesn't work. I've often joked that I ban notes on set, and I've been like, oh, cute notes, and chucked them in the bin. And, now don't get me wrong, like, yeah, it's good to have notes per se, and it's good to have a rough idea of key messages, but reading from a script, it's super hard to do, and it's hard to do naturally, and it never really comes across the way you want it to, because there's no real flexibility to it. The whole point of sitting down to create this kind of content is to do it in a really kind of conversational and authentic piece that really gets somebody to understand you, because people like to know who they're doing business with. There's a saying that says people do business with people, they don't do business with businesses. And it's true. We're trying to build a connection between the person being interviewed and the audience who's watching. So whether that's a potential customer or client, or whether we want that interview to be really conversational. So I'll often spend the first 10 minutes just, having a chat and breaking the ice and really just shooting the shit with them. And often they won't even know that the camera started recording when I launch into the questions that I really want to ask them. And again, if I know in advance what those key messages are that they're trying to get across, and I've got questions that I know I need to ask, and I know that this type of question will give this type of answer, and an answer that speaks to that key message that they really want to get out there. I mean, it's my job to make sure that this video is a worthwhile investment for them. And I think the truth of the matter is that regardless of what industry you're in, people generally tend to look at video production as this really big one-off expense. So I really try and talk to clients about the notion of not really thinking about this as a one-off thing where you're going to get one video and one output or one case study from. I want you to start thinking of this notion of building an asset library. So, you might do a shoot where we're there all day, or even on multiple days, or spread out over a few months, but these all stack up to multiple pieces of content that you can pull from for years to come. For example, you can take 60 seconds of it here and there to create reels for Instagram, where you can create short ads and vignettes, or you can pull things out and only address, certain things and speak to one certain point from one particular project, or multiple things from multiple projects. And yeah, in reality, a shoot might cost you, X amount of dollars, but you should be able to potentially create unlimited assets to repurpose down the track. So I really like to speak to clients about working long term and essentially becoming an integrated partner within your business. The benefit here is that not only do I get to know their business, I get to know the way they communicate with their audience, what their brand values are, what they look like. And the more I work with clients, then the more I can get a deeper understanding, and I get to just really be able to create this asset library that they can essentially draw from for years to come. Now, I've got clients that I'm working with where we might be creating a video today, but I'm pulling out content or something that we shot 3 or 4 years ago because it relates to what we're doing now, because we're discussing something specific in a particular video. So I'm able to go back into the archives and get stuff off the server to be able to serve our objectives today. And I think that's a really big missing piece when it comes to the media industry and content creators. They traditionally look at a finished project like a one-off event, and a lot of them won't even speak to the client until the end of the next project, which might not be for another 12 months or years sometimes. With the system that I've got and the way that I work, I speak to most of my clients on a monthly basis, and I'm creating content for them on a monthly basis. So I've got this constantly growing library of content and assets that can serve them and their business for years to come. And we stand a much, much better chance of being able to deliver results and, get them a return on their investment. So yeah, it might be X number of dollars today, but over time, this stuff can pay for itself over and over and over again because of the long-term use that we're getting. So it's really important to not just go with the cheapest guy here because it stings, a little bit less upfront. You really do need to work with a supplier who's got a really high production value, because the last thing that you want to do is go back and refilm a ton of content because it doesn't stack up over time. And a lot of the time, refilming some of this stuff just isn't possible. So, if you can't do that, there's a lot of money wasted if it's not done right. You should really be able to get, say, 5 or 6 years out of your content if it's done properly. That's why it's really important to take the time to work out ultimately what you're trying to say, and not just doing a video because everybody else is doing it. And if you've only got a limited budget and this isn't something that you'd be able to do on, every or if not most projects, if you could only do one type of video to get longevity and serve you for a lengthy period of time, then 100% I'd recommend doing that kind of about us or brand story video to really tell your story as a business. Anyone who's watched my videos for a while, you would have seen me talk about this a whole lot. But for those that haven't, this is a particular type of video where it's you as the architect or the designer or the builder, basically telling the viewer why you do what you do. And it lets them know who you are as a person and as a business, and what drives you, and what you want for them in their experience of working with you. And ultimately, you want to paint a picture, and you want to paint that picture so well of why they should work with you that picking up the phone and speaking to anybody else, it just wouldn't make any sense anymore. And it's not an option. The benefit of doing videos like this is those people who then they do go and they do pick up the phone to speak with you, they're a lot more engaged with you. They're a lot more connected with you and your business. And they're likely going to be calling or getting in contact with you because they've pretty much already decided that you're the person for them. So the qualifying process and the sales process it's a lot smoother because these guys are your ideal clients, and there's likely already that relationship there with them because they feel like they know you after watching this video. So if you can only do one type of video and one piece of content, then this is absolutely the type of video that you should be doing. And again, there's a format and a process for this too. The last thing that I want to touch on before we wrap this up is how you can make doing this kind of content a lot more cost effective rather than having to fork out potentially thousands of dollars on your own. And that's bringing some partners on board to share the cost of this with you. And it's something that doesn't get spoken about enough, but cost sharing is such a great and viable way to not only bring the cost of a particular project down, but also for multiple people to benefit from the work that we're creating. At the end of the day, there's always more than just the builder or just the architect who want to market their services and show off their hard work in the project that you've all just created together. So the basics of brand partnership or cost sharing is that whoever gets involved is sort of pooling money together to make the financial cost and the investment of making a really, really good project feature actually work out in a much more cost effective way. I often bring this up with people, and there's still a lot of people who aren't necessarily aware that sometimes that's how these videos really get put together. It's not just because the architect or the builder sitting in front of the camera has forked out a chunk of cash. There's actually often other people behind the scenes who are financially invested in this and contributing money toward getting that video created. So, to give you just a little bit of a run through on how that works, when I'm speaking with a builder or an architect and I mention to them about bringing some partners on board, that could be a brand partner, for example. So let's say you're a developer and there's a builder involved and the architect and the actual developer who's trying to sell sell an apartment or whatever it is. I'm creating content that can be used between all of these parties involved, even if that story essentially stays the same. You can make small tweaks here and there to the final outcome that'll favor one party more than the other, or vice versa. So I might go in, shoot the project, do the interviews, and then you can sort of create, I don't know, 3 or 4 separate exports for not much more money than just creating one output. Alternatively, you can just create one output and one film and make sure that everyone gets a kind of even spread. And whether it's through brand association or say, one of the bigger partners might have a bit more of a following, then you can put that content on their platform as well, and as well as your own, to give you and your business further exposure and exposing yourself to their audience as well as yours. So you're essentially stealing their audience. So basically, you're getting that video to more eyeballs, and that's never a bad thing. So brand partners could be, some services, for example. It could be the timber flooring guy who helped out, or it could be Party Cladding or Dulux. It could be the interior designer who did all the interiors, or the color specialist who chose the color palette for the interiors. Whoever else that you can think of that's involved on the project could potentially be someone who might be interested in going in on this with you and spreading some of that cost. And that list can kind of be endless. And if you do a deal with some of those larger suppliers, for example, like Laminex or Hardy Cladding, who, have quite a large market share, that, they can afford this type of thing, then there's absolutely no drama and no harm in approaching them and saying like, hey, we're looking at doing this video and I think it's going to be great for you. And I think it's going to showcase your product and blah, 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 blah. Yeah. And there's an opportunity here for you to get some messaging in there if you like. And you can do that and soft sell that kind of thing in a way that's tasteful and people won't necessarily object to. Kind of the opposite to what you see on the block, which is brand, advertising, because you know that these guys are all sponsors contributing financially toward the show getting created. The block is essentially one giant commercial and one giant ad with a few contestants thrown in there to mix it up a bit. But if you do it like that and you do it so blatantly and so obviously, expect people to call you out on it, because it's going to leave a bit of a sour taste in their mouth. But when it's done tastefully, it can work really, really well. And these brands can get quite good results from it. The flip side of this is you can also get a little bit of unspoken credibility, if you will, through brand association. And people are going to see this video on that brand's website and will think a little bit higher of you and your own business. And it kind of elevates your position within the market to be seen alongside some of these larger brands that everybody knows and everybody can associate with. So it adds a little bit more substance there for you because you're associating with these brands. So yeah, if you can get some of these larger players and these, partners on board just to help spread the cost, then everyone kind of wins. And I've done this on quite a few projects in the past, and it saved everybody involved hundreds and hundreds of dollars compared to if they were all just to pay for this by themselves. So cost sharing is something that people should absolutely, definitely consider, because sometimes I think the financial investment might get in the way and might get people worried and think, well, if I don't get my money back on this thing, it was a complete waste of time and it was all for nothing. This is a way to really spread out some of that cost and spread out that risk and not make it as financially risky, so to speak. So the more people that get involved, the cheaper it gets for each person. And it definitely has to be a little bit of a balance to make sure, everybody's getting the right amount of messaging and the right amount of exposure thrown in. So with a little bit of massaging here and there to make sure it's not too heavy-handed to one party or the other, it's not too complicated to make sure that everybody walks away happy and like it was a worthwhile investment of their money. And you can easily make it on brand with individual logos for different people and give everybody different deliverables as well. So that's another way that you can go about doing it. So don't be afraid to have that discussion with partners as the project's coming together, as it can definitely have huge benefits for you and everybody else involved. So guys, that's it for me with this video. I really hope that you found it informative, and I hope that I've demystified what narrative driven or storytelling content is for you. I'd love to hear your feedback on this if it's something that you think you'd now consider, now that you know a little bit more about it and a little bit more about how it works. If you're still not quite sure on how all of this can work for you, I've got a free workshop on my website that you can access at lightandlines.com.au, where I go in depth on how this can work in the bigger picture of your marketing to connect you with your ideal clients and really get you building those dream projects that you've always wanted to work on. So check it out. It's completely free and it's packed with value. If you have found this useful and informative, I'd love it if you could give me a subscribe, as it does help other people find this content to further help them in their own business. So let me know in the comments below if you're now considering creating a narrative-driven architectural film for your next project. Now, as promised at the start of this video, what you're about to see is a video by another filmmaker I know who runs an architectural film studio in Queensland called Raven at Odds, and it's run by Nicholas Struger. Nick has worked with some of those big brands who we all know and we all love their work. Studios like BVN Architecture, The Local Project, Place Design Group, and Cox Architecture, just to name a few. Nick's been working on the Gold Coast Open House, which is an architecture film festival, and one of his recent films of Banksia House by Aphora Architecture has massed a massive 108,000 views in the space of 2 weeks, and it's proof that, in his own words, good architecture, a focus on story and cinematography that suits the subject, yields engagement and a meaningful outcome. There's simply no need for gratuitous camera moves, fancy edits, pumping music, or a scene change every 3 seconds. This is architecture film, slow, considered, and subtle. Now, I'm not going to embed his video into this one because practically it's a bit unethical, and I want this thing to get all the views and traction it deserves. So what I'm going to do instead is put the link in the description below if you're seeing this on YouTube. If you're on Instagram, because links in descriptions don't work, head over to YouTube and type in Banksia House by Aphora Architecture. So that's APHORA Architecture. So please click the link, head over there and take another 6 minutes out of your day to enjoy what truly is a work of art. So with that being said, enjoy Banksia House, and I'll see you on the next video.